Well, good afternoon, my friends. I hope you're all doing fantastic in this holiday season. This is Carpo on my YouTube channel talking about religion and Santa Claus and priesthood and a few other things. I'd like to start off by saying, I'm always reluctant to make videos like this out of the fact that I'm aware that somebody will always be offended when you're talking about religion. But over the years, that's never stopped me from doing so. Although I studied these things consistently over the years, I don't generally talk about my own beliefs as much as, I should say, my own studies into beliefs and comparative religion, because it's pointless. I've had so many discussions over these things, these topics, that I've come to the conclusion that we are pretty much stuck in the way that we think, and nobody's going to change that overnight. We can always plant seeds or ideas. But more than that, it became less important over the years for me to prove others were wrong. In other words, I would argue no problem with somebody who was religious when I was younger. These days I generally say, you're welcome to believe what you choose and move on, because it's not worth my energy to argue. And it really doesn't affect me. However, there's a huge issue in society where it does affect the people. So I sat down and I said, hey, I'm going to start a religion, call it Antlerism, right? That was the joke that I was going to make for the video, but you'll notice I'm wearing this collar right here, okay? This is the prop for the video. This is what would you call these little white collars? Every priest that you see wearing a little tiny square of white on the front of his collar. And people say, well, that's what priests wear. And I'm always curious about where these traditions come from. So I looked into it a little bit and I found out, and I'll just read exactly where it came from because I saved the article. It makes no sense for me to try to kind of retranslate it here. But, okay. According to the Church of England's Enquiry Centre, citing the Glasgow Herald of December 6, 1894, the detachable clerical collar was invented in 1865 by the Reverend Donald MacLeod, Church of Scotland minister in Glasgow. And then it goes on to say, pretty much priests just started wearing it after that. And the reason that was so interesting to me is because I've always been fascinated with clergy and this clerical order which the church has. And to be quite honest, I was curious to know what the church themselves thought about calling a priest father. And I was surprised to find out a majority of, say, Catholics, when they were asked these questions about whether they feel separated from clergy, a majority of them thought that we should get rid of these hierarchies that they have within the church. So a lot of, I think it was up to 80% of Catholics want to end clergy, the separation of clergy, which is really interesting to me because it shows that even within the church it's an issue. And often when I'm looking into religious texts or meanings, I actually go to the websites of the religions themselves. As much as you would think, oh, well, that's biased, of course they're going to say what they want to hear. That's what's important, because I want to know how they themselves justify some of these questions that outsiders are asking, such as, well, how can you protect priests when they're abusing children consistently? I mean, when these reports came out about what priests, how much abuse was going on in the churches, it was not a surprise to most people. I mean, within the religious communities themselves, maybe they were surprised, but these are just people. And wearing that collar puts you in a separate category from your flock, your people. And what that does is it leads to a separation, it leads to an arrogance, and a willing separation of clergy, like the bishops and the cardinals, the Pope himself, sitting on a pedestal above the people who are equal under supposedly God's eyes. Now, of course I'm not a religious person, but I have a innate understanding that this world is magnificent and amazing, and that as far as I'm concerned, the universe may be conscious. There may be a higher being or a higher energy that we don't understand, but even with all my analysis in my life, I don't think that it's can be written down on paper. These are some of the things we cannot share. And in fact, a person would say, well, this is the only book you need, the Bible. Another person would say, no, this is the only book you need, the Christian Science. Christian Science. And on the front it says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. And all these different versions of Christianity. The Book of Mormon, another one. And I love talking to the Mormons when they come to my door. They're all just versions of reality that work for individuals, and if it works, I say go for it. If you want to believe whatever reality you want to put yourself into, there's nothing wrong with that. But the minute you start trying to push that onto others, the minute you try to put it in schools and demand it's put in schools, demand that kids are taught the other side of evolution, creationism, there's no argument there. I don't care how much we dispute the history. I don't care whether or not we have disagreements on the scientific accuracies of carbon dating or anything else. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. And it's just purely, does no good for an individual to think that way. It's not going to help you in your future in any way. It won't help you in your career, but it's not even going to help you spiritually. So, in other words, believing in some of these literal Bible truths is what gets people into a lot of trouble. In my opinion, this is the book, if anything, that a person would be better off reading. Grimm's fairy tales. You might think, what? Well, fairy tales are a collective evolutionary thought pattern of all people. And these stories can be felt and understood by individuals, all individuals. You can talk to many people who are members of churches or religions who haven't read their own Bible. To me, if I was religious, that would be the very first thing I would have to do. I don't care how difficult it is. In fact, if I was firmly believed I was a Christian, I would have to learn Hebrew. Because how long can it really take? A couple of years to learn how to read the Bible in Hebrew? And that would be the proper way to understand it. It shows me that there's a lack of seriousness among many people who really claim to be Christian. That it's just kind of a, well, my parents were Christian, so I'm a Christian. Show up at church on Sunday, good to go. And if that works for a person, as I said, fine. Got to keep it to yourself, though. And there's another aspect to it, which is, as long as society is divided in what we think the truth is about basic issues, then we'll continue to suffer because of it. Now, there was one aspect of, you probably heard of the Quakers, and they're a fascinating study. The Quakers, they were originally, that was looked at as an insult to them, because they would quake when they would reach their inner light. Their church was set up completely different. Instead of having a bunch of pews facing the main podium, they had all of their chairs facing the middle of the room, and everyone just faced each other. And everyone would just sit quietly until somebody had something to say, and they would say it. But one of the fascinating things is that they didn't believe that a person had to follow a specific set of standards the way many other religions do. I'm just going to read the little thing because that's why I copied these, and they were hated. Okay, it says here that the persecution of Quakers in North America began in 1656 when English Quaker missionaries Mary Fisher and Ann Austin began preaching in Boston. They were considered heretics because of their insistence on individual obedience to the inner light. So they were punished because they believed that you had the power within yourself to find your own God and your own reality. They were imprisoned for 5 weeks and banished by Massachusetts. Their books were burned and most of the property confiscated. They were imprisoned in terrible conditions and then deported. This is just one of many, of course, and I'm not going to read any, but there were, they were banned Quakers from the colony. They had been banished from many different areas until the Toleration Act, which was the 1700s, somewhere around there. Before that, you were forced by the state to believe what others believe. I mean, it was that simple. Pretty much no matter where you lived, even if you did think you had freedoms to preach what you wanted, you might disappear, you might be banished, or you might just get your ass kicked by the locals. And finally, we live in a day today where I can sit in front of the camera and say, no, this is bullshit, and this is bullshit, and the leaders aren't going to imprison me because I'm talking bad about religion. That's a power that we don't want to take for granted. Now look, I think I mentioned this previously when I started this video. I don't think I brought it up in this yet, but this idea that there's a war on Christmas is ridiculous. What it is it's just a different viewpoint of things from different sides. And there are a small group of people who are insisting on pushing Christmas into everything. The word Christmas, they have to say. I have no problem with Christmas, even though most of us have seen Zeitgeist and since then seen repeated many of these ideas of Mithras, and many of the religious beliefs and historical figures have the same story of, dead for 3 days, the sun rising again, rising on the cross. And anybody who's looked at the actual, looked at the celestial aspects of this realizes that the sun sits in the sky for 3 days on the horizon on December 21st through the 24th. This is the solstice. Then it begins to rise on the 25th, December 25th. This is the sun rising again. It is literal. It is actually a literal interpretation of something that we can all see. And yet, people have to anthropomorphize it. They have to put it in a man on a cross. Because people they just couldn't understand how to, we still, to this day, can't really figure out how to I can't even figure out how to put it into words. Trying to understand the world through the world's lens is impossible. We have to put it in a way we understand, which is why we anthropomorphize things. But, I guess the reason why there's so much resistance against the idea that Christmas is dominated by Christianity is because Christians basically culturally appropriated the holiday from the pagan festival of the solstice. And I'm sure that they've been celebrating since humans were aware of the sun rising again. And because of this, there's almost like, in this modern world where we have so much more information at our disposal, the modern Alexandria library, if you will, you have to sort through a lot of BS to get to the truth. There's a lot of misquoted and misunderstood comparative religions, but generally these stories endure through many different cultures. What's sad is that people can't say, I believe in this reality, and I believe in this reality, and that's okay. It's kind of like, if you like pizza and you hate burritos, I like burritos and I hate pizza, we can sit at the same table and eat and talk. It doesn't offend you that I don't eat what you eat or believe what you believe is good. But the minute it goes to religion, sitting at a table becomes a kind of standoff between the people. Not always, and there are plenty of people who can discuss religion openly. But if you're a true, firm believer in your own religion, namely Christianity, then you believe you have the only one true religion and that a person can only get to the truth through Jesus Christ. And perhaps that's true if you think of Jesus as the Son. Now, the term Jesus didn't even exist. The word Jesus did not exist at the time of Jesus. We know this. But the idea that he was called Christ, the word Christ is the same as christened, which is the anointed one, is what it really meant. And, I don't want to get into the history of it because that's not what I intended to do here. But you can go back to the Zodiac and the 12 signs, 12 disciples. If you can look at all the comparisons of Christianity with, ancient pagan traditions, you really have a hard time denying if you cannot look and see that there's an actual correlation there, then I don't know what to say. It's pretty obvious, but we're so wrapped up in what we want to believe. And I guess the reason why I'm not anti-religion, but I am anti-church. And that was really the point of this video. I am not anti-church so much as anti-clergy, anti-clerical, anti-pope, anti-Vatican. And when I think about the Vatican, I think of the Dark Ages, I think of the Crusades, I think of the Inquisition. These were people traveling around converting others forcefully under pain of death. The fact of what religion did to so many people back then, and is continuing to do today in other countries, is, look at it this way. The Chinese saw these problems. They saw the problem with religion, so they're just banishing all religion. That's not the solution. Government should not get involved and tell people what they can and can't worship or believe. Government getting involved in people's beliefs that's why we have a separation of church and state. But that's the thing. It's the same way with the clergy. When people want to know, what should I believe in my Bible? how should I interpret this? They look to the priest, who looks to the bishops, who look to the Pope. And we're asking other people how to interpret the reality that we're all living in. If you're really going on one book, look it up yourself. You see? We're constantly affected by other people's opinions and viewpoints. So it's really hard to get our own view if we're not asking the questions to ourselves, if we're just asking others. That is an authority-based system, and that's not what any religion was intended to be. But that's what all religions turned into, because as long as there is a flock of people who will believe, there are a flock of people waiting to take control of them. And I don't know what else to say about it, I guess the couple main points to make here is that, all churches, of course, for the most part, are tax exempt. I mean, look at Scientology. Any Christian who is maybe frustrated with me for talking bad about Christianity, ask yourself how you feel about Scientology, or, as a religion. And you probably think it's absurd. But do you have the right to think that Scientology is absurd when many people involved are just as strongly into their beliefs as you are? L. Ron Hubbard was a moron. He was a thief, a liar, a charlatan. And it's the biggest pyramid scheme in history, yet people still believe it. And it should show us something about ourselves, our desperate desire to want to understand. But has it helped us understand the world? Or has it just confused things more? What are people really after? They're after redemption. And redemption is now, right now. It's not in the next world, it's right now. And I guess this is where the big disagreement comes in for a lot of people. Many people believe that this life is just preparation for the next. And the reason why I seem just kind of scoff at that whole idea, when I was younger, I remember an adult telling me, she was all excited about it. She said, I don't remember how we got into a conversation about God or religion, but I was young, maybe 9 or 10, and I'll never forget. She said, I'm really excited. I actually can't wait to die so I can get to heaven and see God or see Jesus. And I just thought about that. It just stuck with me all my life. I've thought, I met somebody who told me that they can't wait to die so they can get to heaven. I thought, through the years processing that, I realized when we're unhappy in our daily lives, of course we want to get to heaven, right? But maybe we should get off that train of arguing whether heaven exists or not and ask ourselves, what do we really have now that we know we have, that is precious, that we can all agree on? We have our lives, we have the world, our resources, the natural world to look at, and we take so many of these things for granted. It's not our fault. It's not that humans are stupid. It's that it's going to take a long time for all humans to agree on what intelligence is. Okay? There's not an us and them type mentality where there's the smart people and then the dumbasses who believe in religion. Not at all. Very intelligent people believe in religion, and very foolish people are atheists. There's no consensus or consistency to it. Whatever's happening in your life, you might want to grab onto something. And that's okay to have a life preserver. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's not causing division between us and other people. So, with that, I say you should definitely join the Church of the Antler. And there's no actual... I won't even go there. This thing keeps falling off anyway. There's not a lot other to cover. There were a few things that I did take notes of. Something about how many passages talk about stoning people to death if they don't obey, or they work on Sunday, and it's not worth the argument. I'm not an atheist, okay, and I can't stand the atheist websites where people actually spend their lives fighting against the Bible or picking it apart, because who are you talking to, right? You're sitting there trying to convince Christians that their Bible's wrong. Do you really think that that's going to work in that way? Well, it often just comes down to I'm right and you're wrong kind of attitude. And I realize that both parties are usually unhappy about where they're at. Because the person who's doing all right doesn't sit and fret about and spend a whole lot of time on what others believe. But this is the one thing I wanted to mention, and this is the issue I have with Christianity. It's called solified, and solified basically means there's only one way to heaven, if you will. Solified is Latin, by faith alone. also known as justification by faith alone, is a Christian theological doctrine commonly held to distinguish many Protestant churches from the Catholic Church. The doctrine asserts God's pardon for guilty sinners is granted and received through faith alone, excluding all works or good deeds. And I don't even have to read the rest of it to tell you. This is a well-known bullshit line that I hear from people, that all you have to do is ask to be forgiven. And for a person standing from my viewpoint, if someone's to tell me, because I've asked Christians this directly, I've said, so if you go around burning villages, raping, pillaging, and murdering your whole life, and then you're laying on your deathbed and you say, God, forgive me. Jesus, forgive me. And you really mean it. Do you go to heaven? And many Christians will say yes, absolutely. And then I'll ask this question. What if I spend my whole life helping other people? Going out and sharing my wealth with others, helping villages in other countries, basically giving up everything I have and sacrificing myself to the world. Yet I don't take Jesus. Then do I go to heaven? And they'll say absolutely not. And I know not all people believe that, but it's one or the other, you see. If you believe in sola fide, if you really believe that through faith alone you're saved, that means that all the people who were never introduced to Jesus, right, are just going to go to hell. Well, of course, there's all kinds of little justifications the Christians have made by saying, well, no, actually, there's a term for it. There's the age of accountability, which most people can't seem to agree on, where if you're too young to know better, then you go to heaven anyway. Or if you're in a culture who wasn't introduced to Jesus. It's not well thought out. And when you think that people are going to hell, regardless of the good deeds they've done, you've got a serious problem with your thinking. That's my opinion. I just hate seeing people look down on each other when a person does good works. Or the idea that a priest will get into heaven after he's molested a bunch of kids. Hate to say it, but that's happened a lot. It's just, this world we live in is very confusing and very frustrating sometimes. And we want to develop any ideas we can to try to hang on to reality, but as long as it's not causing us division, religion shouldn't be a problem. And hey, I have no problem saying Christmas, like I said. And right behind me, I've got a nice Christmas tree here. See? Picked it out. Beautiful. So, somebody asked me about whether I had a tree the other day. So I was like, yeah, I got a real Christmas tree. Douglas fir. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I might as well. What is Christmas? It's time for family. That's really all that matters. When people say Jesus is the reason for the season, no. That's just one idea. The season is about renewal, rebirth, and it truly is related to the solstice, the lowest sun in the sky. And take it for what you will. I just like to see people actually celebrate. Just being with family or friends instead of fighting them about words and terms of what you call a holiday. The president tweeted last month that he's officially calling November 28th Thanksgiving. I mean, he posted this whole tweet. And when asked about it, he said, well, there's a war on Thanksgiving. He's saying people want to change the name of Thanksgiving. This is the kind of bullshit division tactics that people are putting out there to keep people fighting amongst each other. There's no fucking war on Thanksgiving. Nobody wants to change it. I mean, there's always going to be a small group of society that just wants to poke holes in everything. Let them. You don't have to listen to those people. But this idea that there's really a war on Christmas or a war on Thanksgiving or any other holiday, it's just ludicrous. Anyway, it's a time to be with family. It's a time to enjoy it. And we've turned it into a commercial cesspool. So hopefully we can still make the most of it with the ones we love. If we're fortunate enough to have ones we love. That's my rant. Talk to y'all later.